When I left the orphanage, I discovered my grandfather left me 600 acres. But in the barn, what I found would change not just my future, but the entire story of my past. It began on my 18th birthday, the day the world is supposed to open up for you. For me, it felt like a door slamming shut. 18 years in the system, moved from home to home, until I landed at St. Jude's Home for Boys, and now I was being politely but firmly shown the exit. They give you a duffel bag with a few changes of clothes, a $100 bill that feels both like a fortune and an insult, and a list of shelters. They call it aging out. It feels like being unplugged. I stood on the cracked concrete steps of St. Jude's, the place I'd called home for the last 6 years, and the only thing I felt was the hollow echo of my own breathing. The air was cold for May, carrying the scent of damp pavement and exhaust from the city bus that hissed at the curb. This was it. My grand farewell. If you're watching this and you've ever felt that kind of alone, the kind that's so deep it feels like a part of your bones, then hit that subscribe button. This channel is for people like us, people who know what it's like to have to build a life from the ground up, with nothing but the ghosts in your pockets. My ghost was my grandfather. I barely remembered him, a tall, quiet man with hands like worn leather and a scent of sawdust and soil. He'd visited a few times when I was very young, before my parents were gone, before the world fell apart. After they died, he just vanished. I was told he couldn't take me, that he wasn't fit. I spent years being angry about that, building a wall of resentment around a memory too faded to even be real. Mrs. Gable, the director at St. Jude's, handed me a thick manila envelope. Her expression was the usual mix of pity and professional detachment. "This came for you, Leo, from a law firm." I took it. The paper felt heavy, important. My name was typed on the front, Leo Vance. Inside was a letter on crisp, expensive letterhead. It said that my grandfather, Arthur Vance, had passed away 6 months ago. It said I was his sole heir, and it requested my presence at the office of Abernathy and Sons, downtown, at my earliest convenience. I looked up from the letter, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. Mrs. Gable was already turning to go back inside, her duty done. The door clicked shut, leaving me with the letter, the duffel bag, and a future that had just cracked wide open. The law office was the kind of place I'd only ever seen in movies. Dark wood, leather chairs that sighed when you sat in them, and a silence so profound you could hear the dust settling. Mr. Abernathy was an older man, maybe 70, with kind eyes behind thick glasses and a suit that probably cost more than everything I owned combined. He didn't treat me like a charity case. He treated me like a client. He spoke in a calm, measured voice, explaining the legal jargon in simple terms. "Your grandfather, Arthur, was a very private man," he began, folding his hands on the massive desk between us. "He didn't have much, but what he had, he wanted you to have." He slid a folder across the polished wood. "He left you his property, a farm, up in the northern part of the state, about 600 acres of land, a house, and a barn." I stared at him, unable to process the words. 600 acres. It was a number so large it had no meaning. I'd spent my life in rooms that were 10 feet by 12. The idea of owning a patch of grass, let alone a space that big, was impossible. "He also left you this," Mr. Abernathy continued, pushing a smaller, sealed envelope toward me. It was old, the paper yellowed at the edges. My name was written on the front in my grandfather's shaky, spidery handwriting. "He stipulated I was to give this to you only when you turned 18. He said you'd know what to do." The lawyer cleared his throat, a moment of emotion breaking through his professional calm. "He also left a small trust fund to cover the property taxes for the next 5 years and provide a modest living stipend. It's not a fortune, Leo, but it's a start. enough to give you time to figure things out. I didn't know what to say. The anger I'd held onto for so long felt foolish, a child's defense against a world I didn't understand. Why would a man who abandoned me leave me everything he had? It didn't make sense. The bus ride north was 8 hours of watching the city melt away into suburbs, then into towns, then into nothing but rolling fields and dense forests. The landscape grew wilder, the houses fewer and farther between. With every mile, the knot of anxiety in my stomach tightened. What was I walking into? What kind of life had this stranger, my grandfather, lived? And what did he expect me to do with it? I held his letter in my hand, the sealed envelope a physical weight. I wanted to tear it open, but I was also terrified of what it might say. An apology, an explanation, or just more questions? The bus finally pulled into a tiny town called Havenwood. It was little more than a crossroads with a gas station, a general store, and a diner with a flickering neon sign. The air smelled different here, clean, sharp, with the scent of pine and damp earth. A taxi, which was really just a dusty pickup truck, with a sign on the door, was waiting for me. The driver was a woman named Mary, with a weathered face and a friendly smile. She knew who I was before I even said my name. "You must be Arthur's boy," she said, her voice warm. "We all wondered when you'd show up. Your granddad was a good man, kept to himself, but a good man." The drive to the farm took another 20 minutes down a paved road that turned to gravel, then finally to a rutted dirt track. The trees pressed in on either side, their branches forming a canopy overhead. It felt like driving into another world. And then we broke through the trees, and I saw it. The property wasn't a neat, picturesque farm. It was wild, untamed. The fields were overgrown with tall grass and wildflowers. The house was a simple 2-story wooden structure with a sagging porch and peeling gray paint. It looked tired, lonely. Behind it stood the barn. It was huge, far larger than the house. Its red paint faded to a dull, rusty brown. It dominated the landscape, a silent, waiting giant. Mary pulled the truck to a stop in front of the house. "Here you are, kid. Home." Home. The word felt alien on my tongue. She handed me a ring of old iron keys. "Mr. Abernathy had these sent up. The big ones for the house. The others, well, Arthur had a lock on everything." I thanked her, paid her with some of the money from the lawyer, and watched as her truck disappeared back down the dirt road, its taillights swallowed by the trees. The silence that descended was absolute. It wasn't the empty silence of the city at night. It was a living silence filled with the hum of insects, the rustle of leaves, and the distant call of a bird. I was completely, utterly alone. For a long time I just stood there, my duffel bag at my feet, the keys cold in my hand. I was 18 years old, the owner of 600 acres of wilderness, and I had never felt smaller or more lost in my entire life. The fear was a physical thing, a cold weight in my gut. Part of me wanted to turn around, walk back to town, and get on the first bus heading anywhere else. But where would I go? Back to a shelter? Back to the life I was so desperate to escape? No, whatever was here, whatever secrets this place held, it was mine. It was a beginning. Taking a deep breath, I walked up the rickety steps of the porch, found the big iron key, and fitted it into the lock. The door groaned open into a world preserved in dust and memory. The air inside was thick, smelling of old wood, dust, and something faintly spicy like cinnamon and pipe tobacco. Sunlight streamed through the grimy windows, illuminating floating dust motes in golden shafts. The furniture was simple, handmade, and worn. A large stone fireplace dominated one wall. A threadbare armchair was pulled up close to it, a book lying open on the small table beside it, as if my grandfather had just stepped out for a moment. It felt like a violation to be there, a stranger walking through a life that had ended. I explored the small house first, a kitchen with a cast-iron stove, a bedroom upstairs with a simple bed and a handmade quilt. In every room there were books, shelves overflowing with them, novels, history, poetry, manuals on carpentry and farming. He was a reader, a builder. I found a framed photograph on the bedside table. It was of a young couple, laughing, squinting in the sun. My parents. And standing behind them, his hand on my father's shoulder, was my grandfather. He looked younger, stronger, but his eyes held the same quiet intensity I vaguely remembered. There was no picture of me. I spent the first day just cleaning, sweeping away the layers of dust, washing the windows, letting in the light and air. It was mindless work, physical work, and it kept the questions at bay. But as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the overgrown fields, my gaze kept returning to the barn. It loomed in the twilight, a place of secrets. I knew with a certainty that settled deep in my soul that the answers I was looking for weren't in the house. They were in there. That night I slept in my grandfather's bed under the handmade quilt, the strange living silence of the country pressing in around me. I held his letter in my hand, still sealed. I wasn't ready. Not yet. First, I needed to understand the place he'd called home. The next morning, I woke with the sun. I made a simple breakfast in the old kitchen and drank coffee on the porch, watching the mist burn off the fields. The world felt new, raw. After I finished, I couldn't put it off any longer. I took the ring of keys and walked across the damp grass toward the barn. The doors were massive, made of thick, weathered planks, held shut by a heavy iron chain and a formidable, rusty padlock. I found the key that looked right, its teeth worn and complex. It took some effort, but the lock finally clicked open. The chain fell away with a heavy clang. I put my shoulder to the door and pushed. It moved with a deep, groaning complaint, scraping against the hard-packed earth floor. A slice of daylight cut through the darkness inside, illuminating a cavernous space filled with the scent of hay, old metal, and dry earth. The interior was vast, the ceiling soaring high into a web of rafters where birds had built their nests. Light filtered through cracks in the walls, creating stripes of gold in the dusty air. On one side were empty animal stalls. On the other, a workshop. A heavy workbench stood against the far wall, covered in tools, all neatly organized, cleaned, and oiled. Saws, hammers, chisels, planes. This was where he worked, where he built the furniture in the house, I realized. But the rest of the barn was strangely empty. For a structure so large, it held very little. Just a few stacks of old hay bales, a rusted-out tractor from a bygone era, and a collection of empty wooden crates. It felt hollow, incomplete. I walked the length of the barn, my footsteps echoing in the immense space. I ran my hand along the workbench, touching the tools he must have held every day. I was searching for something, though I didn't know what. A clue, a sign, anything that would help me understand the man who had left me this strange, silent inheritance. In the far back corner, half hidden behind a stack of rotting hay bales, I saw it. A single wooden crate, newer than the others, and it wasn't empty. It was nailed shut, and on the top, burned into the wood with a hot iron, was a single letter. V, my last name. Vance. My heart started to pound. This was it. This was different. I hurried back to the workbench, found a crowbar, and returned to the crate. The nails were long and deep. It took all my strength to pry the lid open. With a final splintering shriek of wood, it came free. I peered inside. It wasn't filled with tools or old junk. It was filled with files, dozens of them, and on top of the files lay a thick, leather-bound journal. Beside the journal was a small, locked metal box. I lifted the journal out. It was heavy, its pages filled with the same spidery handwriting as the letter. I opened it to the first page. The entry was dated almost 20 years ago. It read, "They came to me today, a young woman and her child, fleeing. He will find them if they stay in the city. The world is full of monsters, but not all of them have claws and fangs. Some wear suits and carry badges. I told them they could stay. The old root cellar is hidden well enough. It is a risk. But what is a life worth if you don't risk it for another?" I sank back on my heels, the crowbar falling from my hand. I flipped through the pages. Each entry was similar: a date, a brief, cryptic description of people, a family from the city, a man who witnessed something he shouldn't have, a journalist with a story that was too dangerous to publish. He wasn't just a farmer, he wasn't just a carpenter. My grandfather had been hiding people. This barn, this land, it wasn't just a farm, it was a sanctuary, a stop on some kind of modern-day underground railroad. The files in the crate confirmed it. Each one contained a new identity: birth certificates, driver's licenses, social security cards, all expertly forged. There were maps with routes marked, notes on contacts in other states, lists of supplies. It was a massive clandestine operation, run by one quiet old man in the middle of nowhere. My mind reeled. The man who I thought had abandoned me, the man I'd resented for years, had spent his life saving others. Maybe he'd sent me away not because he didn't want me, but to protect me, to keep me clear of this dangerous secret life he was living. The weight of this revelation was crushing. This inheritance wasn't just land and a house. It was a legacy, a dangerous, complicated legacy. And then I remembered the second item in the crate, the small, locked metal box. I didn't have a key for it. I took it back to the workbench, my hands shaking. I found a heavy hammer and a chisel. I didn't want to break it, but I had to know what was inside. I placed the chisel against the lock and struck it hard with the hammer. The metal shrieked. I hit it again and again until the lock finally broke. I lifted the lid. The box was lined with velvet, and inside, nestled in the soft fabric, were two things. The first was a stack of letters tied with a faded ribbon. They were addressed to me, one for every birthday I'd had since I was 5. He had written to me every single year. The second thing took my breath away. It was cash. Stacks and stacks of it, $100 bills, neatly bundled. I didn't count it, but it had to be tens of thousands, maybe more. A note was tucked into the top bundle, his handwriting again. "For the work, it always needs money. Use it wisely, or use it to run. The choice is yours, son. The choice is yours. Run from this dangerous legacy or embrace it." I stood there in the dusty silence of the barn, a ghost in my grandfather's secret world, holding 18 years of unread letters from a man I'd never known. The anger I'd harbored for so long was gone, replaced by a profound, aching grief. Grief for the years we'd lost. Grief for the man I was only just beginning to meet. And I still hadn't even opened the first letter, the one Mr. Abernathy had given me. I walked out of the barn and into the bright afternoon sun, my mind a storm of confusion and sorrow. I sat on the porch steps, the metal box on one side, the journal on the other. I looked out over the wild, overgrown land that was now mine. It wasn't just 600 acres of dirt and trees. It was 600 acres of secrets, 600 acres of refuge. I finally picked up the letter from the lawyer's office, my fingers trembling as I broke the seal. The paper was crisp, the ink faded but clear. "My dearest Leo," it began, "if you are reading this, then I am gone and you are a man. I owe you an explanation. I owe you more than that. I owe you a childhood. I know you must hate me for not taking you in. I want you to know that there has not been a single day in all these years that I have not regretted that choice, but I need you to understand why I made it." He went on to explain. My parents hadn't died in a simple car accident, as I'd been told. They had been activists fighting against a powerful, corrupt corporation that was illegally dumping chemical waste in poor communities. They were getting close to exposing the truth, and they were silenced. It was made to look like an accident, but it wasn't. My grandfather knew it, and he knew that the people responsible were powerful, with deep connections. They would have come for me next, to ensure the family line and any potential evidence was gone forever. So I made the hardest choice of my life, he wrote. I let the world think I was a broken old man who couldn't care for his grandson. I let you go into the system where you would be anonymous, lost in the bureaucracy, safe. I disappeared. I bought this farm far away from anyone who knew me, and I watched you from a distance. I couldn't be your grandfather, so I became a guardian angel you never knew you had. Every penny I made, every resource I had, went to making sure you were safe, even if you never saw me. My vision blurred with tears. The abandonment I had felt my entire life wasn't abandonment at all. It was protection, a brutal, painful, but absolute form of love. He had sacrificed his relationship with me to keep me alive. This land, the letter continued, became a place for people like your parents, people who fought against the powerful and needed a place to hide. I couldn't save my own son, so I spent my life saving others. It was my penance, my purpose. Now it's all yours. The land, the house, the secrets in the barn. What you do with it is your decision. You can sell it all. Take the money and build a new life for yourself, far away from all this darkness. You deserve that. You deserve peace. Or you can continue the work. But know this, Leo, it is a heavy burden to carry. The choice must be yours, and yours alone. Whatever you decide, know that I have always loved you, and I have always been proud of you. Your grandfather, Arthur. I sat on that porch and cried. I cried for the boy who grew up feeling unwanted. I cried for the parents I barely remembered. And I cried for the heroic, lonely old man who gave up everything for me. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The silence of the farm no longer felt menacing. It felt peaceful, sacred. I looked from the letter to the journal, to the box of money. Sell it all and run. He had given me an out, a chance at a normal life. It was tempting. God, it was tempting. I could go to college, travel, be a normal person without a history that felt like a curse. Or I could stay. I could pick up the torch. I could become the guardian of this sanctuary. I could honor the man who had sacrificed everything. It felt like standing on a cliff edge. One step forward into a dangerous, uncertain future. One step back into a life of safe anonymity. And in that moment, I knew I couldn't walk away. I couldn't let his life's work, his penance, die with him. It was a part of me now. It was in my blood. I spent the next few weeks devouring his journal and the letters. The journal told the stories of dozens of people who had passed through this farm. Whistleblowers, witnesses, families fleeing persecution. He gave them new names, new lives, and a safe passage to a new beginning. He was a quiet, unassuming hero. The letters to me were more personal. He wrote about his grief, his loneliness. He told me stories about my father as a boy. He gave me advice on life, on how to be a good man. He taught me more in those letters than anyone had in my entire life. I learned how to fix the leaky roof on the house from one of his carpentry books. I learned to tend the small vegetable garden he'd planted behind the house. I started to feel a connection to the land, to the rhythm of the seasons. It was hard work, lonely work, but for the first time in my life, I felt like I had a purpose. I belonged somewhere. One afternoon, a sleek black car I didn't recognize rolled up the long dirt driveway. A man in an expensive suit got out. He introduced himself as Mr. Sterling, a representative for a large development corporation. He was smooth, charming, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Mr. Vance," he said, extending a hand I didn't take. "I've come to make you an offer. We're buying up land in this area for a new luxury resort development. We are prepared to offer you a very generous sum for your 600 acres. He named a figure that made my head spin. It was more money than I could ever imagine. Life-changing money, the kind of money that could buy me any future I wanted. It was the easy way out, handed to me on a silver platter. "Your grandfather was a stubborn old man," Sterling continued, his smile tightening slightly. "He refused to sell no matter what we offered. But you're a young man. You have your whole life ahead of you. You don't want to be stuck out here in the middle of nowhere." I thought about my grandfather's letter, about the people he'd saved. I thought about my parents. I looked past Mr. Sterling at the old barn standing silent and watchful. I knew what I had to do. "The land's not for sale," I said, my voice steady. Sterling's smile vanished. "I think you should reconsider, son. An offer like this doesn't come along every day. We're not going to take no for an answer." There was a threat in his voice, thin and sharp as a razor. He was used to getting his way. He represented the same kind of power, the same kind of soulless greed that had taken my parents' lives. "I said it's not for sale," I repeated, looking him straight in the eye. "This is my home. You're not welcome here. Please leave." He stared at me for a long moment, his eyes cold and assessing. Then he shrugged, a flicker of something ugly in his expression. "Your mistake," he said, before getting back in his car and driving away, leaving a cloud of dust in his wake. I knew it wasn't over. People like him didn't give up easily, but I wasn't scared. I was my grandfather's grandson. This land was a part of me now, and I would protect it. I would protect his legacy. The weight of that choice settled on me, heavy but right. I wasn't just Leo Vance, the orphan. I was the keeper of Havenwood Farm, and my work was just beginning. Now I want to pause the story for a second and just talk to you right here, because this moment for me was everything. It was the moment I stopped being a victim of my circumstances and started making a choice about who I wanted to be. Maybe you're at a crossroads like that in your own life. Maybe you're facing a choice between the easy path and the meaningful one. It's scary, I know. The easy path is tempting. It promises comfort, security. But the meaningful path, that's where you find your purpose. That's where you find out who you really are. If this is hitting home for you, if you've ever had to make a choice like that, I want you to let me know in the comments. You don't have to share the details, just let me know you've been there. Because this community is built on people who understand that the hardest choices are often the ones that define us. We're in this together. Now, let's get back to what happened after that shiny black car drove away, because Mr. Sterling was right about one thing. It was far from over. His visit was just the opening move in a game I didn't even know how to play. A few days later, the official-looking letters started arriving. First, it was a notice from the county about a property line dispute. Then, a violation warning for the state of the barn, claiming it was a public hazard. Then, an astronomical and clearly incorrect property tax reassessment. It was a campaign of harassment by paperwork, designed to bleed me dry and bury me in bureaucracy. I felt overwhelmed, out of my depth. I was just a kid. How could I fight a corporation with an army of lawyers? I called Mr. Abernathy. He listened patiently as I explained everything, from what I'd found in the barn to Mr. Sterling's visit and the flood of legal notices. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "I had a feeling it was something like this," he finally said, his voice heavy. "Arthur never told me the details, but I knew he was protective of that land for reasons that went beyond sentiment. He told me once, 'Some things are more valuable than money and worth more of a fight.' It seems you've inherited his fight, Leo. He agreed to handle the bogus legal challenges, but he warned me it would be a long and expensive battle. The trust fund my grandfather left would help, but it wouldn't last forever against a corporate giant. "They'll try to grind you down, Leo," he warned. "They'll hope you get tired or scared or just plain run out of money." After I hung up, a cold dread settled over me. Maybe I had been a fool. Maybe I should have taken the money. What was I even protecting? A legacy I had just discovered for people I had never met. Doubt began to creep in, a poisonous weed in the new garden of my purpose. That night, unable to sleep, I went back out to the barn. The moon was full, casting a silver light over the fields. The barn was a dark silhouette against the starry sky. I went inside, the familiar scent of hay and old wood, a strange comfort. I needed to feel close to him, to the grandfather I was only getting to know through his words and his work. I went back to the crate of files, looking for, I don't know what, an answer, a sign. I pulled out his journal again and sat on an old hay bale, reading his entries by the light of a lantern. I read about a family he helped escape a violent political regime, smuggling them across the border in the back of his old farm truck. I read about a young man who had witnessed a mob hit and was being hunted by the police and the criminals, how my grandfather hid him in the root cellar for a month until it was safe to move him. Every story was a testament to his courage, his quiet, unwavering conviction. He never wrote about being scared, only about what needed to be done. As I read, I realized something. He wasn't some superhero. He was just a man who had lost his own family and decided he would not stand by while other families were destroyed. He was afraid. I was sure of it. But he did it anyway. That's what courage was. Not the absence of fear, but acting in spite of it. Near the back of the journal, I found an entry that was different from the others. It wasn't about a person he was hiding. It was about the land itself. "Sterling's company was sniffing around again today," he wrote. "They don't know what's under their feet. They just see empty land, ripe for development. They have no idea this place is a graveyard." A graveyard? My blood ran cold. I kept reading. "Before this was my farm, it belonged to the state. Before that, it was part of the old reservation. There was a residential school here 100 years ago. One of the bad ones. The children who died there, they weren't sent home. They were buried in unmarked graves, scattered through the woods at the north end of the property. The local tribe knows. The elders hold the stories. But the official records were lost in a fire. The corporation thinks it's just folklore. But I know better. I've walked the woods. I've felt the quiet sorrow of that place. This land holds ghosts. It is sacred ground. I will not let them pave over it. I will not let them build their monuments to greed on the bones of forgotten children." I closed the journal, my heart pounding. This changed everything. It wasn't just his secret work I was protecting. It was this, a hidden, tragic history, a sacred burial ground. The development company didn't just want to build a resort. They wanted to erase a history of pain and injustice. My grandfather's fight suddenly became crystal clear. He wasn't just a stubborn old man holding on to a piece of land. He was a guardian, in more ways than one. He was protecting the living who needed sanctuary, and he was protecting the dead who deserved to rest in peace. The next morning, I knew what I had to do. I drove my grandfather's old, beat-up pickup truck into Havenwood. I went to the general store and asked Mary, the woman who'd driven me to the farm, where I could find the local tribal council. She gave me a curious look, then gave me a name and a number. An elder named Joseph Blackwood, I called him. I was nervous, unsure of how to explain myself. I was just some white kid, the new owner of land that was once his people's, but I told him my name, told him I was Arthur Vance's grandson, and I told him what I had found in my grandfather's journal. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Your grandfather was a good man," Joseph Blackwood finally said, his voice deep and resonant. He was a true ally. He listened when others wouldn't. We have been fighting the development for years, but our voices are small and their pockets are deep. We have our stories, our oral history, but they have the deeds and the permits. I want to help, I said, the words feeling inadequate. I don't know how, but I won't sell. I'll fight them. He asked me to meet him. We met on my property, at the edge of the woods my grandfather had written about. Joseph was an old man, his face a roadmap of a long life, but his eyes were sharp and clear. He walked with me into the woods, pointing out subtle depressions in the earth, clusters of specific plants that he said only grew where the soil had been disturbed long ago. This is the place, he said softly. Our ancestors are here. Your grandfather understood that. He honored it. We stood there in the dappled sunlight, the only sound the whisper of the wind through the pines. I felt the weight of history all around me, a profound sadness that seemed to seep from the very soil. The corporation has a hearing next month, Joseph told me. A final zoning approval. It's a formality. They have the politicians in their pockets. They will get their permit, and then they will bring in the bulldozers. Then we have to stop them before that, I said, a new resolve hardening inside me. I told him about my parents, about the corporation that had killed them for trying to expose the truth. I realized, standing there in those sacred woods, that my fight was the same as theirs, the same as my grandfather's. It was a fight against the powerful who would crush anyone and anything that stood in the way of their profit. Joseph and I, along with Mr. Abernathy and the tribal council, devised a plan. It was a long shot, a desperate move, but it was the only one we had. We couldn't fight them on their terms. In the courtrooms and council meetings they already controlled. We had to change the battlefield. We had to bring the truth to the public. The week before the zoning hearing, we contacted a journalist, a young, hungry reporter from a national news outlet that wasn't afraid to take on big corporations. I showed her my grandfather's journal, the entries about the residential school. Joseph and the other elders shared their oral histories, stories passed down through generations. Mr. Abernathy provided the legal context, showing the pattern of harassment and the suspicious loss of historical records. But we needed more than stories, we needed proof. My grandfather's journal mentioned that he had found something, but he never wrote what it was. He just wrote, "Proof is buried with the past. You have to be willing to dig." I spent the next 3 days searching the barn from top to bottom. I looked in every crate, every corner, under every floorboard. Nothing. I was beginning to lose hope. On the third night, exhausted and covered in dust, I was about to give up. I was standing in the middle of the barn, looking at the old, rusted tractor. It hadn't been moved in years. It was just a piece of junk. But as I looked at it, I noticed something odd. The dirt floor around it was slightly disturbed, a faint, almost invisible outline of a square. My heart leaped. I grabbed a shovel. I started digging. The earth was hard-packed and it was slow, grueling work. But a few feet down, my shovel hit something hard. Not a rock. It was a metal lid. I cleared the dirt away and found a small, buried safe. The kind you'd concrete into a floor. I didn't know the combination, but I remembered the hammer and chisel. It took me almost an hour, my hands raw and bleeding, but I finally managed to break the lock mechanism. I pulled open the heavy door. Inside was a single oilcloth-wrapped package. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely untie the string. I unwrapped it carefully. It contained a small leather-bound book. It was a ledger and a collection of old glass plate photographs. The ledger was from the residential school, dated over a century ago. It was a death register. It listed the names of the children, their ages, and the cause of death. Malnutrition, disease, abuse, dozens and dozens of names. A record of forgotten atrocities. The photographs were even more horrifying. They showed emaciated children in ragged uniforms. They showed the priests and nuns who ran the school, their faces grim and severe. And the last few photographs, they showed men digging in the woods. They showed small, plain wooden coffins being lowered into the earth. This was it. This was the proof. The lost records. My grandfather had found them somehow, and he had buried them, keeping them safe until they were needed. The journalist published the story the day before the zoning hearing. It was an explosion. The ledger, the photographs, the testimony of the tribal elders. It was undeniable. The story of the forgotten children of the Havenwood School was on the front page of every major newspaper. National news crews descended on our small town. The corporation, Mr. Sterling, the corrupt local politicians, they were caught in a firestorm of public outrage. The zoning hearing turned into a media circus. The corporation's lawyers tried to dismiss the evidence as a fabrication, but it was too late. The truth was out. The zoning was denied. An official investigation was launched by the state and federal governments. Archaeologists were brought in, and with the guidance of the tribal elders, they began the solemn work of finding and identifying the lost graves. The resort was dead. The corporation packed up and left, their reputation in tatters. They had wanted to pave over history, but instead, history had buried them. In the aftermath, things were quiet. The farm became a focal point for the tribe, a place of remembrance and healing. They held ceremonies in the woods, honoring the children who had been lost for so long. I was no longer just the owner of the land. I was its steward, a partner in protecting its sacred history. My life found a new, unexpected rhythm. I worked the land, not as a farmer, but as a caretaker. I repaired the old house, making it a real home, and I kept the barn ready. I kept the sanctuary alive, because the world is still full of monsters, and people still need a safe place to hide. About a year after the story broke, I got my first call. It came on a burner phone my grandfather had left in the safe, a number known only to a handful of people in a network I was just beginning to understand. It was a woman, her voice trembling with fear. She was a witness in a federal case, and her cover had been blown. She had a son, they were running, and they had nowhere to go. I thought about my grandfather's journal. What is a life worth if you don't risk it for another? I gave her the directions I had learned from his notes. I told her I would be waiting. I hung up the phone and looked out the window at the old red barn. The sun was setting, and it seemed to glow in the fading light. It wasn't a place of secrets and shadows anymore. It was a beacon. My inheritance wasn't 600 acres of land. It was a purpose. It was a chance to honor my parents, to live up to the legacy of the grandfather I had never truly known, and to be a small point of light in a world that can be very dark. It's not an easy life. It's a lonely life in many ways. But for the first time, I am not alone. I am part of a story that is much bigger than my own, and that, I've learned, is the greatest inheritance of all. The story doesn't end there, of course. Life goes on. The fight to protect this land, to honor its past, is a daily one. And the work my grandfather started, that continues too. It's a heavy responsibility, but it's one I've chosen. Every day I wake up in this house, surrounded by the quiet strength of these hills, and I feel a sense of peace I never thought possible. I found my home, not just in a place, but in a purpose. So what's the lesson in all of this? I think it's that our real inheritance isn't what's left to us in a will. It's not money or property. It's the stories we're given, the legacies we're entrusted with, and the choices we make when we're standing at a crossroads. It's about choosing the harder right over the easier wrong. It's about understanding that some things are worth fighting for, even if the fight seems impossible. If my story has resonated with you, if it's made you think about your own legacy, the one you've been given or the one you want to build, then I hope you'll join our community here. Subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts in the comments below. What does the word inheritance mean to you? Your story matters. Your voice matters. And here you'll always have a place to share it. Thank you for listening. And remember, no matter how lost you feel, there's always a path forward. Sometimes you just have to be brave enough to find it.